Today on Off the Grid, the whitewash of the Vietnam War. Will history repeat itself? That's today on Off the Grid. With the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War coming in 2015, the Pentagon has already begun planning for the commemorations. But what is this really about? Is it about commemorating the vets? Or is it about whitewashing history? Let's go to our off-the-grid command center where my vigilant producer, Alex Logan, has the latest. Alex?
So the Pentagon is spending $65 million on the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. The goal is to get more than 10,000 corporations, civic groups, as well as government and community organizations to join as partners and help sponsor hometown events to honor Vietnam veterans, their families, and those who were prisoners of war and missing in action. That's from the Army News Service. So what do you make of this, Governor? $65 million?
Isn't it a little bit late? I mean, they're talking 1965. That's when they're officially going to say Vietnam started. Well, maybe officially it started when their troops hit the ground at that point, but we had actually been in there since the 50s with advisors, and President Kennedy had even raised that number of advisors, but then he took a turn the other way before he was killed. Kennedy had ordered our first 1,000 out by December of '63, and he said we'd be completely out of Vietnam by the time he was reelected and serving in '65. So there would not have been a Vietnam War had John F. Kennedy lived. But unfortunately, John F. Kennedy was taken out. He was killed. Now that's another matter on its own of who did that, but you notice that as soon as Kennedy was killed, the Vietnam policy reversed itself. Lyndon Johnson then sent more troops in, and of course, you had, we'll discuss it later, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is what put our combat troops on the ground in Vietnam. But I find it interesting that they're going to spend this kind of money to honor the Vietnam veterans now. I think it's a little bit after the fact. It's nice that they do that, but I think they're doing it more for themselves than they really are the veterans.
A former Marine would agree with you. He returned to Vietnam in 2012 to start a project to help villagers defuse unexploded U.S. ordnance. And he stated, "I don't like this idea. I don't trust that the truth will be spoken with regards to this anniversary." So do you agree with Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, I do agree with Mr. Campbell. I think it'll be a big snow job. I think it'll be another rah-rah campaign to attempt to change history, to somehow make the Vietnam War an honorable thing. Now, don't get me wrong. The men and women that served there were honorable. They were victims too. But there's no way they're going to convince me the Vietnam War was some honorable thing. All it was a civil war. The Vietnamese were throwing out the French who had colonized them. They wanted them gone. They wanted to be self-governing. But what did we do? We sided with the French leave, and they leave it all to us. And we end up with a 15-year war or whatever it went on over there. 58,000 of my countrymen died. Probably millions of Vietnamese died. They're now going to try to make this an honorable war at this date. Well, it doesn't surprise me that they would attempt to do that to create honor in their mistakes again.
And for the fiscal year of 2013, the Pentagon spent $4.19 million of an authorized $5 million annual budget. About $1.6 million went to salary, payroll, and benefits, and another $1.46 million went to contracted support. It costs $1.4 million to maintain the organization's website. So depending on who you talk to, the project is either 9 or 12 full-time government employees, meaning the average salary and benefits per employee ranges from $133,000 to $178,000.
What are we paying all these people to do? Honor the Vietnam veterans? Is that what they're getting paid this money to do? I would say it's government waste. The honor should have taken place 50 years ago. They're a little bit after the fact, and I think it's much ado about nothing. I think it's them wanting to whitewash the war now. We just got through with the Kennedy killing, 50-year anniversary of that, and they sure whitewashed that down the drain and want us to believe that idiotic Warren Commission again. Fortunately, most people don't buy into that. I think people will support the veteran, and they'll feel the veteran got cheated, the veteran's a victim, which I've always maintained. Are they going to report honestly on what the Vietnam War was truly about? I'll wait to see on that one.
The project's director commented this: retired Army General Claude Mick Kicklighter is paid $180,618, and that's for less than full-time work. He said, "Our mission is to do everything we can to help a grateful nation thank and honor Vietnam veterans and their families."
I'd say that too, Alex, if they were kicking me $180,000. Tell them I'll be happy to do it. Send the check this way.
But a Vietnam veteran responded, "When I found out it was run by the Army, my antenna went up sky high. They basically gave you a flag and bless local events, all flag wavy, and thank you for your service. Other than that, I don't know what they're commemorating. That should be recognized for service, but is there another agenda?"
Oh, there's certainly another agenda. It's our warlike agenda of the United States today. It's to get us to feel that every war we participate, we're on the side of right and good. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case. They want you to believe that the United States has never entered into a war where we might have been the bad guys. And I'm sure with the Army running this thing, it'll be nothing but glorification for a war that never should have been fought in the first place. Gee, does that sound familiar about any wars within the last decade or two? I'm not sure.
And so part of this glorification has been commemorations in the Defense Department's online interactive timeline of the Vietnam War. They describe the Gulf of Tonkin incident as the USS Maddox was attacked by the North Vietnamese gunboats in the Gulf of Tonkin. Is that how you would describe the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
Well, that's what they told us, and I wasn't there, so I can't, but I can only go on when I taught at Harvard and McNamara came through right before he died. And he admitted the Gulf of Tonkin incident was fabricated, that one single bullet may have struck one of the ships the first day and nothing happened the second day, and it's disputed whether we were in international waters or not. But ultimately, McNamara admitted it was a false flag operation to get us into the war. Sound familiar, these things that happen that get us into wars, people? Anybody have any lights going off on that? Other than me? You know, when you look through the annals of history, you see that most wars are started by what they call false flag operations. The United States did not want to go to war in World War II. They were very much opposed to it. They basically said that's Europe's business. After the horrible World War I, we would prefer not to get involved in World War II. And then lo and behold, what happened? Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor's what changed everybody's mind and put us into the war. Then, of course, in 2001, we had the second Pearl Harbor to put us into wars.
So the timeline also misrepresents the My Lai massacre, the secret bombings of Cambodia, Operation Speedy Express, just to name a few. Author Nick Turse wrote The Pentagon about the timeline. It seems to me that some timeline entries are lacking pertinent information, are watered down, misleading, and in some cases, grossly disingenuous. The sheer number of examples suggests that this is something more than accidental.
Why do they not refer to My Lai as a massacre? That's what it was. Hundreds of villagers were shot and killed in a trench and murdered. In our culture today, we somehow think war is glorious. I don't think it is. I think it's man at his lowest. The people that fight the wars are victims. The real perpetrators are the politicians. Wars only happen because of failed politics. So when the politicians fail, the end result is war, unless, of course, they're failing on purpose so that you go to war. Always remember what Major General Smedley Butler said, war is a racket. And that's exactly what it is. It's a money-making scheme where certain people and entities get wealthy at the expense of people dying. And it's that simple. War is a racket. Vietnam was a racket.
So the Department of Defense's timeline on the website refers to the March 1968 massacre as an incident, not a massacre.
I guess you could call that an incident. Maybe they call a major truck collision on the highway an incident. Trust me, it was a massacre. When innocent people are shot and gunned down and killed, that's a massacre.
As pointed out by journalist Nick Turse of truthout.org, the death toll is listed as more than 200 and not more than 500 as has been reported. Word of the atrocities did not actually reach the American public until November 1969 when journalist Seymour Hersh published a story detailing his conversations with a Vietnam vet.
And you can bet, because they've pulled the press out of these new wars, they learned a great deal from Vietnam of not having the press actually in the wars. You keep them where you feed them in the information. Look how long it took for My Lai to get into the public's eye. And you can bet if the government had their way, it would have never got there. It got there by mistake. Hirsch, the writer, learned about it, and that's the way we always learn about those things. It isn't forthcoming from our government because our government's not very forthcoming about things like that.
So would you say that the successes of the war were not appreciated, or was the war a military debacle?
I think that it was a total debacle. I mean, we won every battle, but we lost the war. You're never going to beat someone when they're fighting for their freedom and they're fighting to self-govern. And that's what the Vietnamese were doing. They were fighting for their freedom and their right to self-govern. Ho Chi Minh even wrote a letter to our presidents way back in the 50s and said, please, we're fighting for your freedom, for our freedom, the same way you fought the British for yours. Stay out of it. But of course we couldn't. The United States seems to be that way today. And it's all since Vietnam and that era of time.
And do you think the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are comparable to the Vietnam War?
Yeah, very much so. The war in Iraq especially was based completely upon lies. I remember when Colin Powell got in front of the UN and talked about weapons of mass destruction, and they talked about Saddam Hussein's ties to Al-Qaeda. And lo and behold, when we got in there were no weapons of mass destruction. Then they tried to say they snuck them out to Syria. They want us to believe the NSA can zap into all our emails and our phone calls, but they wouldn't see a caravan of weapons of mass destruction being moved from Iraq to Syria. I kind of tend to doubt that, but they needed an excuse of why Saddam didn't have them. And then, of course, you go to ties to Al-Qaeda. Saddam Hussein would have actually been an ally. He didn't like Al-Qaeda either. When you look at the wars today in Iraq and Afghanistan, here's a question I'll throw out to all the viewers. Is Iraq better today, or were they better before we got there? Because before we got there, women were going to college. Women did not have to wear veils over their faces. Listeners out there, please write in and inform to Jesse. Please tell me, explain to me how the Iraq War was successful and that it should have been fought, because I ain't buying it. So I want to say thanks for tuning in today. Keep tweeting me at Governor J. Ventura and post your comments on Facebook. I'll get back to you as soon as I can on the show. And remember, always stay vigilant.